So this is a series I'm thinking about starting up in search of great cinema, where I basically talk about 10 films that I recently watched that I would like to recommend.
Was slightly inspired by, if you've been here for a while, I used to do a series called What I Watched This Month.
But I think it's better because more time goes on between and, more quality movies will be talked about. But this is also just a more nonchalant, chill, unscripted video of me talking about movies I want to talk about. So the first one is What Happened Was, directed by Tom Noonan from 1994. It's this kind of really obscure movie in one of the most popular years, or most popular best years of movies. A lot of people talk about how 1994 is like the greatest year ever for movies, which personally I probably wouldn't agree with that, but it's a popular one. It was Tom Noonan's feature-length debut, and kind of his like only real movie. The story follows two coworkers from a big law firm in New York. They decide to have a dinner at one of their apartments. It's a super strange movie. It's one of Charlie Kaufman's favorite movies of all time, and you can kind of get that. I mean, Noonan played significant roles in multiple of Kaufman's movies, but it feels very Kaufman-esque. But, I think it's a movie, the less said, the better. The less you know going into it, the better, so I'll leave it at that. True Stories, directed by David Byrne from 1986. David Byrne, the lead singer of the Talking Heads. My introduction to that band was actually through the movie Reanimator. There was a poster for the movie Stop Making Sense in the background on Reanimator. I looked that movie up, I watched it, and that was kind of my introduction to the Talking Heads. I mean, Psycho Killer is obviously like one of the most popular songs ever, but more of their discography I discovered through that. The movie is about a small town in Texas celebrating their sesquicentennial, and they're having a celebration of specialness. The movie is filled with all these eccentric characters, from David Byrne playing the outsider touring the city, to John Goodman's bachelor looking for love and wants to sing at the town talent show. There's the town liar, a lady who's so rich that she doesn't even leave her own bed, and she has a robot assistant. It looks at small town culture and the way people interact. He explores the significance of malls to small towns, or at least small town America. He even explores like what jobs mean. There's a scene where a character goes on a monologue explaining that in the past people lived in villages and they worked at the factory, but now we don't do that anymore. People start their own businesses. Instead of working the typical 9 to 5, people today work all the time and they do what they want. But this movie really isn't about those things. You just get a taste of them, but at the end of the day, the movie's just about a small town having a celebration and nothing much else. The movie is fairly funny and just feels exactly what you expect, knowing David Byrne directed it and also wrote it. One of the stars of the movie, Spalding Gray, the one that actually goes on the monologue about jobs. I saw him and it actually led me to watching one of his films, Grey's Anatomy, directed by Steven Soderbergh. It's a very interesting movie. It's a podcast-like documentary where Spalding tells you the story of his rare eye condition and the alternative medicines he tries to take to avoid this risky eye surgery. It's an interesting movie that I would recommend, which led me to another Spalding Gray movie, Swimming to Cambodia, a film nominated for several awards at the Spirit Awards. And funny enough, that film was directed by Jonathan Demme, who directed Stop Making Sense, my original introduction to the Talking Heads. A Ghost Story from 2017, directed by David Lowery. I was watching it because I saw The Green Knight recently, one of the best films of 2021. And my original introduction to this film was we watched the pie scene in film school. Other than that, that's all I really knew about the movie. And the movie covers so many topics with very limited dialogue. What is the meaning of life? What happens after death? How people react to death? How significant, or should I say insignificant, life is? It's a super gloomy and melancholic movie. A movie best left unexplained. A movie you should go into not knowing anything, just like What Happened Was. You should go into it blind. And I recommend going into it in the correct environment and just let the film capture you.
We lay, my love and I, beneath a weeping willow.
The next film I want to talk about is The Innocents from 1961, directed by Jack Clayton. There was this small hype around it recently. I mean, obviously not huge scale, but the people I follow on like Twitter and Letterboxd were talking about it around October. It's a classic ghost story. The story follows Miss Giddens, who takes a job to be a nanny for these two children. Their rich uncle wants nothing to do with them, so he hires her to take care of them. She slowly starts to believe that the house is haunted and that the children are trying to be possessed. This movie is really a masterclass in ambiguity.
The film never really confirms what's going on. Is the woman losing her mind, or are the kids in on it?
Are the ghosts even real, or are they still alive? It really never tells you what's really going on. You can watch this movie several times, or two people can watch this movie and come away with different interpretations of what the film was. and no one's really correct. This film also has a pretty scary scene reminiscent to a part in the book I'm Thinking of Many Things where the male ghost is peeping through the window, and I don't know what it is about peeping through windows, but that gets me. Let's talk about House from 1977. It might be one of the best years for horror. So you have Suspiria, Eraserhead, The Hills Have Eyes, Martin. You also have House. The movie just feels like a dream. The director asked his young daughter what was scary, and that kind of influenced the scares in this movie. The movie's about this teenage girl coming home from school, and she decides that she doesn't want to hang out with her dad and her soon-to-be stepmom. She wants to go to her aunt's house and learn more about her dead mother. So she brings a couple friends on to tag along, and she goes to this big mansion in the middle of nowhere, Japan. The movie explores the effects of World War II on old Japan and new westernized Japan. It explores the director's trauma of the bomb and his fears of that trauma affecting his young daughter, or the different views between his young daughter and him with the trauma. I think it's interesting to look at World War II movies from other countries, like the US. Most popular ones are like Saving Private Ryan and Glorious Bastards, these pretty stereotypical war movies. But then you have other countries like this where they have House, Godzilla, Onibaba, and it's kind of a different look on war. House and Godzilla more about the bomb, and Onibaba more like samurai time war. Or even just like different countries in general's take on World War II, like Come and See, one of my favorite movies of all time, super horrific. It doesn't promote war, it kind of, is against it. Another film I watched was Saint Maud from 2019. Man, 2019 was probably the best year in cinema, or at least my favorite. So many great films came out that year. The story follows a nurse, Maud, who is obsessed with God. She constantly begs and pleads with God, asking him to guide her. She takes a job to take care of a former dancer, Amanda, who doesn't believe in God. Maud doesn't think much of Amanda. She's just waiting for God to tell her what to do next. Until Amanda one night starts asking questions about God. Amanda is curious about Maud's beliefs. This is when Maud's obsession turns to Amanda. She believes that God has chosen her to save Amanda's soul, turn her into a believer. This movie talks about blind faith, kind of like my video on Passion of Joan of Arc, and the effects of this blind faith. The one who actually acts more like a saint in this film is Amanda. She's open to Maud's religion. She's open to exploring her atheism and Maud's Christianity. She apologizes to Maud after she wrongs her. And at the end of the day, this film is very similar to one of my favorite movies of all time, Taxi Driver. It's a case study in this troubled person in Maud. And this film was a very impressive debut for director Rose Glass. It's her first feature-length film, and another great film to add on to 2019's impressive resume. Next, I want to talk about Raw from 2016, directed by Julia. Didn't realize till after I watched it, but she also directed Titan, a movie that came out earlier in 2021 that I was looking forward to watching, probably here soon. Story is about a vegetarian teenage girl who goes to veterinary school, and the older students haze her into eating raw meat. Her parents made her vegetarian, but now that she's in the real world and tasted meat for the first time, she discovers something about herself. The film is about a girl discovering herself when she goes to college. She moves away from her family and friends and gets to truly discover herself, the person that she is whenever she's in this new environment, this blank canvas of an environment. It's one of my favorite coming-of-age films of recent years. It's up there with Shithouse from last year.
Maria, Maria.
Next, I want to talk about The Wolf House from 2018, directed by Chilean directors Cristobal Leon and Joaquin Coquina. It's a stop-motion horror film following a young German girl in Chile who ran away from her German society within Chile. She finds this house in the woods with 2 pigs, and slowly this house turns into a nightmare. The film is actually based on a real German civilization in Chile in the 70s, but man, this movie just oozes creativity. There's a ton of horrific imagery littered all throughout of it. It's a super unique film, and I don't think there's anything like it. It's an incredible debut for these directors. It's a super unique horror film that I recommend. Next, I want to talk about Daisies, a Czechoslovakian film from 1966 directed by Vera Chitolova. It's a film in the Czech New Wave, a movement that I'm not very versed in. The only other thing I've seen in it was The Shop on Main Street. But this movie follows two girls, both named Marie, and they've decided that if the world has gone mad, why don't they go mad? The film is very surreal. The film could be described as an act of visual terrorism, the way it changes film techniques constantly. It breaks every rule in cinema. The film dives into absurdism as the girls try to find their purpose in life and society. A lot of the film, the girls are eating or devouring food. They constantly waste food. And at one point, they have a giant, massive food fight. The Czech had a food shortage during the 60s, and the movie was banned by the Czech government for wasting food. The film ends with this message. It's kind of a jab to the hypocritical officials who turn a blind eye to greater evils than focus on food wastage. This film is critical of the authoritarian government of Czechoslovakia. I also love how this film is basically points out simp culture. These girls constantly go on dates with older men just to eat and leave them stranded later on. But no matter how bad they treat these men, there's another simp around the corner to just feed these women. Last, I want to talk about Ikiru from 1952, directed by Akira Kurosawa. The only other Kurosawa I've seen is Seven Samurai. The film is about a middle-aged man who works this monotonous government job and learns that he only has a few more months to live. It explores the wasted time when working these boring jobs and what impact you have on this world. It explores what it means to live. When he first finds out about his cancer, he becomes incredibly depressed, but he meets a man at the bar who helps him learn how to live life. With only a couple months left, he goes out and lives. The diagnosis gives him perspective on life. Everyone's life is finite, but it's not until you know the end is coming that it hits you. Kurosawa is probably influenced, just like how Obayashi, the director of House, was inspired by World War II. It's probably influenced this existential crisis. I mean, it's not very bold to recommend a Kurosawa, but this is one of his masterpieces, and it's truly a life-changing film. But yeah, let me know what you think of the video. Leave a like if you like the video. Dislike if you dislike the video. And, yeah, see ya.